Welcome to the latest Sitting Comfortably podcast. This is Laurel Lindstrom again, speaking and reading from The Draftsman, my first novel. Previous podcasts have covered Chapter 1 and the first part of Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is... It's now 10 o'clock, I hope you can tell, because the cuckoo clock has just told us. Where was I? Yes, Chapter 2, Simon and Sheila. In part 1, we met Simon and Sheila and learned of their lifelong connection to Shadowhurst, which is Martin Cox's new home. So, Chapter 2 of The Draftsman, Part 2. Are we sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Twisting in her too-deep seat and in her baggy dress and coat, Sheila observed that there's not much room for shopping. And apart from assisting with the bin buying and fitting them all in the car, that was the extent of their conversation. When Simon dropped her back at the cottage after the excursion, she briefly wondered why did people want to spend their money on such impractical things as this silly, small red car. The thought was gone in a moment. "Don't be late," she said, before shutting the gate behind her and heading for the kitchen to get the tea ready in time for the news. By the time Simon came back, a gloomy darkness was turning Shadowhurst's colours into murky, toneless shades. He noticed a slender curl of smoke reaching from the chimney and stretching upwards and mingling with the growing dusk, turning purples and greys slowly into black. Joshua had warned Simon that his new boss was just as likely to leave again as not, so the fire he took as a sign that Martin would stay, at least for the night. There were no lights on as Simon called through the empty kitchen. "Where do you want the bins?" In silence, he lined them up along one wall in a tidy, shining row marking the edge of the kitchen floor. The daffodils he transferred along with the water, which he took great care not to spill, from their jar into a new vase, their yellow trumpets bobbing untidily. The new kettle was slowly filled and switched on. All of these movements, deliberate and careful executions, repeats of familiar patterns, their details, markers that Simon understands, guards, and keeps near. That they are a buffer to hide behind or protect him from unknown alternatives, that they are a means to avoid uncertain challenges, never occurs to him. He inhabits a prescribed and finite space, safe and predictable. Watching the kettle as it came to a boil, Simon made a mental note to warn Sheila. She must not smirk or stare at the long blue velvet coat or the knee-high black leather boots when she comes to see Martin tomorrow. He's their boss, and they want to keep him steady and in the neighbourhood, instead of leaving unexpectedly for some new life in Cornwall or wherever, messing up the continuity, making waves, disrupting the lines. Simon's looked after this estate since his teens, when he helped his dad and granddad. Sheila and her mum before her have always done for Shadowhurst Hall. That's how it is. That's how it will be. The kettle's boiling. All these thoughts were crowding Simon's head and making him feel tired as he kicked off his boots and sloped through the kitchen along the hall to the sitting room. There they are, sitting, staring at the fire, and Alison's saying, How long will he be staying? Where will he sleep? As Martin turned, shaking back the hair, he ignored her and called back, "Where are the bins? I want them in here." To Alison he said, "I don't know, as long as he wants. He can sleep where he likes." The bins being brought in distracted her enough not to be annoyed by Martin's disinclination to engage or confused by his apparent assertiveness and his desire for bins. "Brilliant. You got chrome ones. Line them up over there by the windows." Doing as he was told, Simon said, "Kettle's boiled and I'm off. It's late, if that's okay." Martin nodded without looking at him, so Alison walked with him back into the kitchen. "Thank you," she said. "My brother's a little overwhelmed by it all." Simon looked at her, slightly bewildered, and mumbled, Right, well, good night, Alison," and closed the kitchen door behind him. Alison filled the pot, picked up the change he had left on the table, and called to Martin to come and have some tea. The two of them sat silent, chewing their biscuits, looking at the plate and the cups. Martin barely aware that he wasn't smoking. "Are you off the fags then, Martin?" Alison joked, expecting him immediately to light up. But instead he nodded and hissed "yes" through his 6th chocolate digestive, crumbs flying across the table and peppering their tea. With a malevolent look through the floppy fringe, he changed his mind and shot back, No, not always, just here, I think. You're right, this place is good, but I need it to be different. I need completely different." Slightly perturbed, Alison could not answer, so taking a swallow of tea, she waited for him to continue. Silence. She understood the conversation was over for the day. "I'm off then," she said, knocking back the dregs and standing full of purpose and focused intent. Alison gathered up her bag and scarf, putting them into her basket along with her pumps, before stepping into her wellies. No trace left of Sister Alison, apart from the slight faint of her concern hanging on the air as she smiled and turned away, knowing better than to venture a hug. Martin watched her empty back as she walked towards her car, their children's tales written elsewhere in uncertain lines of shadow, light and darkness. In her too tight trousers and cashmere and pearls, Alison had turned full face away from her brother as soon as their conversation had stopped. She was taking on a new mask, and the view of her husband's wife was the one that she had seen in the mirror since childhood. Poised and in control, with a power to compel, a power to progress whatever task she undertook to its required conclusion. An iron-willed little girl, pouting and flouncing and telling herself that she was not like her family, that she was different, probably a foundling or a hospital mix-up, and she was an imposter in their show. This is why she could love her peculiar baby brother, even though he never spoke to her or their mother. She was always aware that he needed her protection because he was strange, and in the last few years, since Martin's money, their parents' death and her marriage, this unfulfilled vanity was finding its place. All the pieces in her life were in place, so Alison was ready to really be Martin's sister, to fulfill the role, to help him. Now is the time, she had told herself. The foundations of her life and the fulfillment of that childhood self were a reality they could both share and enjoy. Once Martin was better, of course. When he was more normal, more like her. It was a wasted hope, born of vanity. Alison presented the essence of expectation for the wives of wealthy countrymen and for the mothers of their children. Her confection was one of ambition and rigid adherence to her own code, the one that told Alison that she was absolutely in control and that nothing could thwart her, not even her brother. Alison never understood that she could manage Martin's peculiarities only because he allowed it, and only because they both recognized that somewhere in his life he needed her. But maybe that wasn't forever. Martin saw his sister in her own uniform, but never questioned it, because she was always just there, always on time, yet always late in her understanding, with a roving blind spot that randomly blocked her view. Sensible, reliable, efficient, and mostly able to make the right choice, understanding and accepting what she was told, but only as long as it conformed to her view. Listening was no part of Alison, only hearing what she wanted to believe. If something appears to make sense to Alison, she never questions the instructions, has no doubts or curiosity for alternative ideas. She doesn't question the motives of others, as long as those others fit within an Alison convention. "He needs me, don't fret, love," her mother said, and Alison believed it. Sightless beyond her view, Alison is the sort of woman who always has tissues in her bag, always has change for parking, and always has a fully charged phone. She lives still, according to her mother's advice, to always be prepared, always plan ahead, and always be in control. As he heard the door close, Martin sighed and leaned into the flock of garish cushions. He held up his shaking hands. mildly fascinated that they could make such a commotion. He turned to watch the fire, flickers dancing in a chorus line on the chrome of the bins, a row of flame against the fading light beyond. More soldiers lined up and waiting for action. The room was dark and slowly warming. Alison had put on the central heating before she left, and the chill that had at first entwined them was loosening its intense grip. He considered taking off his coat, but the intimacy with the space was still too much. Instead, he went back to the kitchen, finished off the biscuits, and cracked a Paul Roger. Champagne in hand, he moved slowly along the hallway that led around the central courtyard. It was filled with broken bits of flower pots, some crumpled plastic sheeting, a leaning barbecue, weary and beseeching on bended knee. He hadn't noticed the courtyard before and hadn't told Alison what to do about that space. It appeared to carry reminders of some sad history, a jumbled departure, and this disturbed him, so he turned away. He wanted no hints of other people's lives. He wanted only an empty canvas at which he could just stare. Except, moving down past his glass room, he checked 2 of the 6 bedrooms and continued along into the main hallway and the front door. The outside lights Simon had left on, they beckoned into the night's lignin black. Turning them off, Martin faced instead the inside lights, shining on his empty white walls and carpet, the swelling darkness slowly pushing in against the windows from the courtyard. Following his path around a collection of nameless shadows sliding beyond the light from the hallway, he moved along to bedrooms 3, 4, 5, 6, passing random bathrooms as he went, Paul Roger in one hand and glass in the other, in spirits rising. Martin's shifting sensations and perceptions sensed again an otherworldly slightness. He could hear a distant whisper in this house, or perhaps in its surrounds, silent, black, and hidden. He wasn't only drunk, he was moving, gently, seamlessly, hearing almost no echoes, and only a distant, calming murmur. In each bedroom, the radiators were on, the beds fully made, dressing gowns hanging, slippers on bedside mats, tissues and bottled water, plus glass, on bedside tables, and the curtains were drawn against the night. In all the bathrooms there were tasteful shades of fluffy towels in many sizes, electric toothbrushes and toothpastes, along with matching sets of soaps and toiletries, all just for Martin. Stroking the towels and tiles in every bathroom, he sensed the different textures. His fingers remembered another faraway contrast between soft lukewarm water and the harsh cotton fibres of a friendless towel and unwelcome touch. A kiss, unexpected, sudden touch. Touch. Let me help you with that. His Shadowhurst bedrooms were like posh hotel rooms, immaculate, but with no bins or televisions. Alison had done a perfect job. The Paul Roger took him by the hand, warming and mildly dizzying, and led him back to the sitting room and the row of chrome and the reddening fire getting darker and greying to embers. Jazz was playing, and as Benny Goodman gave way to Oscar Peterson in the CD shuffle, Martin dozed off into tunnels and pathways, dark and watery, wispy-aired and alien. Morning found him curled up on the sofa and cushions, still in his coat and boots, empty glass in hand. His day opened to the sound of knocking, a rattling on the French windows. Peering, bleary-eyed and sleepy, confused, he sat up and saw a sharp silhouette contoured with a halo of bright morning light. Standing on the terrace a few minutes before she had knocked, Sheila clocked the clenched glass and the bottle on the floor, and was mildly surprised that there was only one empty. Mrs. Mannering usually sipped her way through at least 2 bottles of Pinot Grigio of an evening. When she saw Martin sit up and start to stand, she opened the unlocked doors and with a fakely cheery "Good morning, sir," stepped a pace into the room and stood behind the bin parade. "It's Martin," What time is it?" He rubbed his head and pushed his hair aside, continuing through a hoovering yawn and reaching into his pocket before he remembered. "Who are you? What do you want?" he snapped. "Your new housekeeper. It's 8:30. Sheila, Simon's wife. He told me to come and say hello and sort out the bins. He said Alison wanted me to do for you." Martin peered at her, silent and cold, impatient, remembering that this was so, and his sister's shock when he'd asked for someone to make the beds and keep the place clean. Scratching his head again, he looked at the floor and said, "I don't want to see you. I want you to do whatever you do without asking me and without me knowing that you're doing it. I want all the beds made every day. I want the house perfect every day, flawless. But sir, Martin, just Martin, none of the sir. It's quite simple. You come in, you make the bed, sweep, do whatever you do, and you leave. I'll leave you instructions if anything else matters, and your money every week. That's all. Can you get me some shopping?" "Yes, Martin," she said, "I can." And that was it, the way he wanted it, and Alison hadn't even been in the house to help. As Sheila turned away, she said, "What about the bins? And how do I make sure you don't see me?" The woman had a point. "You can come in the morning, starting Monday from 8 to 10 every day except weekends. I'll keep out of your way, and if I do see you, it will be because I want to tell you something, or ask you something, okay? And don't worry about the bins." Sheila nodded and took the cash and a set of keys from Martin's shaking, outstretched hand. "Is there a list?" He scowled. Martin could feel his phone trembling in his pocket and turned his back. Over his shoulder he said, "Wait, I want some bread and a pastry and some coffee," almost in desperation. "I'll have it sorted in the kitchen in 20 minutes, she said, and 20 minutes later, his body quivering for nicotine, Martin was dipping an almond croissant into a large cup of oily black coffee. As he sucked in the caffeine and pastry sugars, "Alison," he thought, "you told her." Sheila was gone, but there was a message from Joshua. He would be there soon, bringing spare keys and a couple of DVDs for them to watch. Shivering slightly over his coffee, mouth working around his pastry, he stared blankly at the floor, remembering, broken images floating into his noisy brain, fracturing the rhythms, cracking through the fading hiss. Then he said, spitting buttery flakes and very loud, "White! I want the house painted white!" The kitchen windows stared blankly black, and outside an excitable blackbird was screaming, its message shrill and alarmed. The gloss of black and yellow, "It's you! It's you!" Later, half dozing on the sofa as Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue pounded the walls, Martin was thinking about which bedroom to sleep in. The place was like a hotel, with all the rooms the same except for the master bedroom, which had a dressing room and walk-in wardrobes. Not that. It was the bathroom. The bathroom was too close, and as he drifted in and out of sleep while the trombones sawed the air, he saw the bathroom routine. It was the same every time, but only when Alison had gone down the short hall into their bedroom in her fluffy pink slippers and flannelette nightie. "Alison's a big girl, isn't she, my darling?" And indeed Alison was. Always ahead, always on the rails, no matter how slippery they got, always in charge, all-seeing, all-knowing. Except she didn't see this. She never saw this. His mind remembering the steam, the cold tile. Then, being in the top bunk with the ceiling closing down, and Alison telling him, "Go to sleep now, Martin, go to sleep." And him, counting out loud, complicated sums and long divisions, almost shouting his control until she told him, "Shush, or Mum will come up." Creepy, eh? Okay, that's the end of chapter 2, and I'll be doing another one of these at some point. I hope you're enjoying them. Thank you for listening.